Chapter 60 Night of Slaughter. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. With just one brief moment of shock, the four black market mercenaries suddenly revealed a look of sleazy lust in their eyes. She's the one. I hadn't thought that she would look so much more alluring in the flesh than in the portrait. That's true, killing her just like this will be such a waste. Why don't we? Another one among them rubbed his chin and sniggered loudly, his cruel eyes impudently roving over the enchanting red figure before him. Although they found the red figure standing under the soft moonlight highly alluring, and the other two men's hearts began to itch with lust, they had however still retained a sense of caution. Especially when they saw that their target wasn't showing the tiniest bit of panic, but was highly composed as she stood there with a graceful air, which they thought was rather strange. One of the mercenaries with a hideous scar on his face reminded his companions in a deep voice. The girl seems a little strange and we cannot let down our guard. It will be better if we kill the target and get the mission over and done with. It's just a little girl. Third brother, you are giving her too much credit. One of the mercenaries said, his voice filled with contempt, acting highly indifferent. He looked at the figure in red, her clothes and hair billowing out behind her. He laughed out in derision and said, "It's just one girl, I alone will be able to deal with her." He stepped on the tiles on top of the roof, and summoning his powers, he leapt over to the opposite side. "Killing you will be such a waste, why don't you have some fun with me first?" he said with a sinister laugh. He pounced forward and stretched his hand out in a grasp, reaching towards the front of Feng Jiu's clothes before her chest as she laid upon the roof tiles lazily. At that same moment, Feng Jiu's eyes flashed with an icy chill and her hand closed around the hand her opponent had reached out, suddenly twisting it downwards with a hard snap. Crack! Arg! The sound of bones breaking was accompanied by a mournful howl that tore through the silence of the night, breaking through the peaceful tranquility. At almost the same moment, Feng Jiu, who had been sitting down, used the force from her downward tug to quickly stand up, her foot immediately raising up in a heavy kick. The mystical power imbued into the tip of her foot kicked into her opponent with pinpoint precision right in between her opponent's legs. Unable to utter another sound, he could only groan and whimper as he fought to breathe. The electrifying pain shooting through his entire body was so unbearable that he curled up into a ball, his trembling legs giving way as he fell with a loud thud and kneel. "You only have this little bit of power." Feng Jiu snorted with contempt, releasing her grip clasped over his arm and moving it up close over his throat. Another loud crack tore through the cold air as she broke his neck, and Feng Jiu nonchalantly threw him out towards the yard. "Second brother!" Several voices called out in alarm. The three men stared angrily at Feng Jiu, shocked at the merciless viciousness of those hands, and the speed that they moved at. That speed had not even given them any time to react, and they had been made to watch helplessly as their second brother was killed right before their very eyes. "Kill her!" The man who was slightly older among them shouted out angrily, his voice filled with undisguised malice. The moment his voice fell, he summoned his chi and he leapt over to the opposite roof, the long sword in his hand imbued with his mystical powers, flaring out with a threatening energy. A mystical warrior in the middle levels. Her eyebrow lifted up slightly, looking upon the man's powers with contemptuous disdain. Her hands moved and the razor-sharp dagger gleamed with a menacingly thirst for blood. She charged forward with her body lowered, suddenly spinning around to the side when she was 3 inches away from the sword's point, and her dagger flashed upwards. A low moan sounded, and at Feng Jiu's side, the mercenary soldier's eyes bulged and his body stiffened, before it fell over stiffly onto the yard below. "She killed our boss in one move." The faces of the two remaining men grew burdened as shock registered on them. The oppressive air of slaughter emanating from the girl was much more intense than them as hired mercenaries from the black market, driving a terrifying chill deep into their hearts. Run! A person like this was not someone they were able to take on. If they did not run immediately, their precious little lives would be forfeited right there and then. Chapter 61 Eradicating all trace. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Seeing the figures scrambling away hastily in escape, Feng Jiu's lips curled up in a sinister smile. Once you step in here, do not dream of going back alive. The moment her voice fell, the figure of Feng Jiu flashed into a red blur, like a ghostly spirit cutting through the dark night sky towards the two running figures. The dagger in her hand held in a reverse grip shone with a chilling bloodthirsty gleam. The next moment, the red figure flashed past the two men running for their lives and blood sprayed. The bodies of the two men froze a moment, before falling back into the yard. Thud, thud. There were no signs a fight had taken place left behind, and the killing had not alarmed anybody. The lives of the 4 black market mercenaries had been robbed from them under Feng Jiu's hands quietly and silently. Facing into the wind, Feng Jiu's eyes were narrowed. She looked at the 4 dead corpses in the yard and her gaze dimmed. Mystical cultivators needed to be equipped with martial arts besides cultivating their mystical powers. Only when both aspects are joined together could a mystical warrior be able to bring out the best qualities and exhibit the greatest power. As for her had already reached the early levels of the mystical warrior stage. And adding that to her high proficiency in assassination and astounding skills martial combat, taking on all these mystical warriors from this tiny town did not pose a problem for her. But, if she leaves the town, that insignificant bit of powers would need to be raised up. Otherwise, if she encountered an enemy much stronger than her one day, she would be passively placed at the mercy of others, to be slaughtered as people wished. Leaping down to land in the yard, she rummaged through the several sets of corpses and only managed to find the same black badge from all of them, and carved into the badges, were the characters that said, Black Market Mercenary. Black Market. She muttered softly to herself, searching through her mind for any information about the black market. But, the previous Feng Qinggu had obviously seldom come in contact with such places as there was almost no information at all about the black market in her brain. Looks like I will have to make a trip to the black market. She curled up her lips into a smile. She retrieved a bottle of liquid from within the spatial ring she had previously concocted and poured it over the 4 dead bodies on the ground. A sizzling sound could be heard and the 4 corpses began to bubble and sizzle with light fumes dissipating into the air. The corpses quickly turned into a bloody puddle and soon, all that was left behind were 4 sets of black clothes lying there in a crumpled heap. Next day Guan Shilin came walking out massaging the back of his neck, feeling rather puzzled why he had fallen into such a deep sleep last night. He raised his head and saw Feng Jiu practicing some soft and willowy style of martial arts and he could not help himself but laugh aloud. Little Jiu, martial arts are not done like that. As he spoke, he came to stand beside her and lowered his body slightly to demonstrate a horse stance. He then said, Look, when practicing martial arts, your lower body must be stable, fists tightly clenched, put your strength into your punches, shout out when you throw the punch, and the power from your entire body will be packed into your punch. In this way, there will be strong power behind your punches. If you continue doing it the way you just did, you will fall from just a single punch against your enemies. At that moment, Guan Shilin seemed to have forgotten the day that Feng Jiu had faced against the entire pack of wolves all by herself without a single ounce of fear and did not remember how much like the malevolent god of death himself she had looked when she stole those lives from them then. All that he remembered was that she was a girl merely 15 years of age, regardless that she had a malevolent side to her, but she was just a younger sister that needed him to protect as an elder brother. When Feng Jiu heard him saying that, she could not help it but to laugh. Big brother. Your martial arts are meant for big men like you, where the emphasis is on power. The martial arts I uses the enemy's power against themselves, where mere ounces would lift a ton. As she spoke, she suddenly seemed to have thought of something and she asked. Big brother. I remember you telling me you are practicing your own Guan family's mental cultivation. Am I right? That's right, it's the Guan family's mental cultivation method, and in martial arts as well. Little Jiu, you want to learn it. Big brother will teach you. She laughed and shook her head. No, I mean I have a mental cultivation scroll that will be suitable for you. She tossed the cosmos sack with its spirit mark already removed over to him. In there, is the scroll that you should read through carefully for a period of time. Take a break from your martial arts training for a while and practice this mental cultivation method first. Chapter 62 Underground Black Mark. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Little Joe, you are giving the cosmos sack to me entirely. What about yourself? Guan Shilin opened up the cosmos sack, and besides seeing a mental cultivation scroll that had the words, "Raging Flames of the Dragons and Tigers," written across its cover, he saw that was quite a bit of valuables and money, with several other bottles and tins, which made him look up in puzzlement to ask. "Why are you giving me so much stuff?" He took the scroll out to take a look, and his eyes widened up with incredulity. Heaven-grade mental cultivation. I am seeing it correctly, right? For a mental cultivation scroll like this, it was believed that even the royalty of the Sun Glory country would not be able to possess a single one of these. It must be known that heaven-grade mental cultivation scrolls were the most precious treasures among treasures, and it would be impossible to find a single scroll in a country ranked as the lowly 9th grade. Then, where had she possibly have gotten it from? At that moment, the hands holding the mental cultivation scroll were trembling slightly, highly excited, and suddenly almost feeling as if it was scorching hot. To think that he would be so fortunate to be able to see a heaven-grade mental cultivation scroll. It was just too incredible. That's right, it's a heaven-grade mental cultivation scroll, and it also cultivates strength as well, which suits you just right. She smiled and said, "Your arm makes it impossible for you to train in your martial arts and swordplay now, so stop doing them for a period. Use the time to fully memorize the mental cultivation scroll first, and I'll give you another heaven-grade scroll for martial arts when the time comes." The mental cultivation scroll had been found from among the things her master had handed down to her, and she had thought it was highly suitable for Guan Shilin, hence she had brought it out. "Can I really cultivate with this?" His eyes were sparkling as he looked at Feng Jiu. "Of course." She nodded and said, "If there is anything you do not understand, you can ask me." "All right. Then I shall be going back to my room to practice on the mental cultivation immediately." Guan Shilin was giddy with joy as he held the scroll in his hands. He couldn't wait a moment longer, and he rushed back into his room to begin his cultivation. Feng Jiu smiled when she saw that, and she practiced her Tai Chi for a little while longer to loosen up her body before she went back to her room to cultivate as well. In the subsequent nights that followed, mercenaries from the black market patronized their little yard almost every night, and every single one of those mercenaries who came did not ever return. And all of this was completely not known by Guan Shilin. Because Feng Jiu would use her silver needles to nurse the meridians in his right arm every night, where she would finally trigger his acupoint for consciousness, that made him fall into a sleep till the next day. Several days later, Feng Jiu set up a mystifying maze barricade, and after leaving some instructions for Guan Shilin, she went out through the doors and went towards the black market. At the same time, the middle-aged man who had already been waiting for several days in the inn but still had not received any news was wearing a dark expression on his face. He got up and went towards the black market, cursing as he went. "All of them are such useless trash. They can't even dispose of a single girl." When cursing those very words, it was obvious he had cleanly forgotten the fact that he himself had not been a match for Feng Jiu as well. The black market was an underground marketplace. In there, you could find rare and precious herbs, elixirs, weapons, and everything a cultivator would need. In the black market, there was an arena, a stage for battle, a stage where power won you money and earned you a reputation. And the scattered mercenaries there were usually some escaped convict and fugitives on the run, unable to gain the recognition of any orthodox and legitimate mercenary guilds. In this underground black market, there were some who operated alone, while some were joined in small groups of 3 or 5, and the commissions they received were always some assassination mission that the legitimate mercenary guilds would not accept. In here, they recognized only money, and worked only for money. When a man dressed in bright flamboyant red clothes walked into the black market, many of the people within could not hide their stunned and mesmerized stares, showing clearly on the faces. The man's body was tall and slender, his entire being emanating a kind of sinister allure, the exquisite golden mask decorated with enchanting blooms of red mandara flowers, completely covering over his face, shrouded in a kind of hazy mystery. What really mattered then, was that no one was able to perceive his level of cultivation. Daring to strut into the black market with such swagger, it was impossible he was just an ordinary person without cultivation. And if he was not an ordinary person, then only one other possibility remained. The person held unfathomable power. Chapter 63 Chi Gathering. You are listening at novelfull.audio. From among the mass of searching and probing gazes, an old man dressed in grey stepped forward and greeted, bowing formally at the waist. This old gaffer offers his greetings, as the deputy overseer of this place. Surname Zhu. May I know how I can be of service to you, sire? Casting her gaze one full round, Feng Jiu retracted her eyes, looking at the overseer before her and said, "Get me a private room, where I will be able to watch the battles in the arena." Hearing that, the deputy overseer smiled and said, "Will sire please follow this old gaffer? The arena is further up this way." The old man led the way in front, bringing Feng Jiu to the private rooms on the second level above the arena. "Will sire please see if it's satisfactory?" the old man said, opening the windows before he stood on one side. Feng Jiu stepped up to the front and saw that it was a rectangular arena, surrounded by rows and rows of spectator seats around it. On the first level and the second level were all private rooms, where the entire place, top and bottom, was able to hold almost 1,000 people. At that moment in the arena, there were two fighters engaged in battle and the atmosphere was highly intense, the cheers from the crowd one getting louder than the other. This place here is a branch market and we only have one arena. Hence, we have only set up a single board of ranking. If sire were to go to Cloudy Moon City one day, you can pay a visit to our main market there. Only at the main market, will we have 3 different ranking boards of mystical, earth, and heaven. Seeing that Feng Jiu was just watching and not saying anything, the overseer continued on smilingly. If sire is interested, you can also place a bet on your preferred fighter to win. The payout odds will be 1:10. After watching for a while more, Feng Jiu lost interest and retracted her gaze, turning to look at the overseer and asked, "You have an appraiser here?" The overseer was surprised a moment and he went on to nod his head. "Yes, may I ask what does sire need appraised?" "Medicine." Hearing that, the overseer's face became a little more serious. "Sire, please wait a moment, while this old gaffer fetches the appraiser." As he spoke, he bowed before he went out of the room. The moment the door closed, the overseer looked back thoughtfully towards the room before he left quickly. After about half a burning incense stick's time, Overseer Zhu returned, having brought with him 2 other old men. Once through the door, he immediately introduced them to Feng Jiu. "Sire, this gentleman here is our chief overseer, surnamed Dong, while this gentleman here is our medicinal appraiser, Old Deng." The 2 other men who came in surreptitiously gauged the person in the room. Seeing him dressed in a full suit of red as he sat by the window, his head propped up by his hand as he watched the ongoing battle in the arena, his golden mask decorated with enchanting blooms of red mandara flowers of hell, his entire being emanating a kind of sinister allure, but that same allure was somehow tinged with an insurmountable grace and reverence, that made people involuntarily feel a sense of fearful respect. When the man heard the voice, he turned his gaze over to look at them. Those eyes were deep and dark like bottomless pools, filled with a sharp glint, and faintly tinged with a lazy indolence in them. Just based on their assessment of the face alone, the 2 men knew that the man in red was definitely someone extraordinary. "Greetings from Dong to sire. I wonder what kind of medicine would sire like to have appraised?" Medicine, it was something only a master skilled in apothecary was able to concoct. Needless to mention such a small town as this, even in the Cloudy Moon City, they were rarely seen. Hence, when he heard that someone wanted some medicine to be appraised, he had immediately rushed over. Feng Jiu glanced at them briefly and she went on to pull out a bottle and she gave it to Overseer Zhu standing at the side, and her voice rang out unhurriedly. This is a bottle of Qi gathering dew. It can allow a person whose mystical powers is completely depleted to instantly gain an explosive boost of 3 times their usual powers. The effects last for 1 hour. What? The 3 people were shocked into saying from the incredulous claim they were hearing. Chapter 64 Battle Arena. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This can really let a person whose mystical powers is completely depleted to instantly gain an explosive boost of 3 times their powers. Even as an appraiser of medicines, there was a slight tremor in old Deng's voice as he stepped forward to accept the bottle, his heart filled with incredible excitement. Feng Jiu did not say anything as her eyes had spotted a figure who wasn't unfamiliar to her walking downstairs. Wasn't that the very person she had wanted to seek out? With her lips curved up, her eyes glinted with a strange mirth as she saw that figure sitting down at a spot in the front row as he called over a person from the black market, but she could not hear what they were talking about. The other 3 people in the room currently had their attention fixed on the bottle of Qi gathering dew. The 2 overseers watched intently as old Deng slowly opened cap on the bottle and sniffed at its contents, but after seeing that he did not take any other action after a long while, Overseer Dong could not help himself but to holler at him. Old Deng! Old Deng gave him a bitter laugh as he looked at the 2 overseers and Feng Jiu who was sitting on the windowsill and said, I am feeling rather ashamed of myself. Even though this old man here is an appraiser of medicines, but I have never appraised any medicine like this. What he meant by those words was that he could not verify whether what Feng Jiu was saying was the truth. Hearing that, the 2 overseers were properly stunned, as they had never encountered a situation such as this. Who do you think will finally emerge victorious between that young girl and the big guy? Feng Jiu's voice suddenly sounded, causing the 3 men in the room to be startled. With that question the men walked up and looked down to the arena on the first floor. They saw that a young 16 or 17-year-old girl was fighting a huge brawny man. But the girl was no match for the big man and she had been beaten to be on almost her last breaths, but she was still stubbornly trying to stand up. Overseer Zhu observed the situation downstairs with just one quick glance and said, She is merely on the 6th level of the warrior stage while her opponent's cultivation is at the 2nd level of the mystical warrior stage. Naturally the big man will win, and moreover, the girl is already exhausted and on her last legs of strength, she would not be able to fight any further. Feng Jiu curled up her lips in a smile and shook her head in disagreement. No, she will win. Her gaze fell down onto the girl who was still just as determined to battle and she said, If you bring that bottle of medicine down and give it to her to drink, that way, the results of the appraisal will naturally come out. The eyes of the 3 men lit up immediately. That's right. That method was simple and straightforward. In that way, they will be able to find out whether the medicine was really as amazing as what the man in red had claimed. Moreover, by giving the medicine to the girl in the arena who was already too weak to continue the fight, and she really managed to win, that would be the best advertisement they would give to the product. I'll take it downstairs. Overseer Zhu said, and he immediately rushed to go down, the bottle of medicine grasped in his hand, as he went towards the arena on the 1st floor. The arena, ha 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 ha, little girl, you better surrender quickly. Even if you cultivate for another 10 years, you will still not be a match for me. When he thought of the money that he had bet for himself to win would be multiplied 10 times, he began to laugh loudly, beside himself with joy. The young girl spat out a mouthful of blood, her body felt like it had been run over by horse carriages. It was so painful her body was turning numb, and she wasn't able to summon up even the slightest sliver of strength. But she refused to accept it, she would not accept losing just like this, and did not want to lose in this way. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to stand but fell back down, eliciting a wave of raucous laughter from the watching crowd. Just give up now. Next match. Next match. Don't waste all our time. Someone shouted impatiently from within the crowd. At that moment, Overseer Zhu came beside the young girl with the bottle of medicine in his hand and said something to her. The young girl then took the bottle from him and without the slightest hesitation, she poured the bottle's contents down her throat. Just as everyone was feeling highly puzzled at Overseer Zhu's actions, they suddenly saw that a faint red glow was swirling intensely around the young girl's body. Woo! How was that possible? Chapter 65 Incredulous. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A roar of disbelief erupted from the spectators in the entire battle arena, many of them shot up standing from the shock at what they saw. The incredulous swirl of mystical energy surrounding the girl was who had lost all her strength just a moment ago. That highly visible waving swirl of mystical energy could not be faked. The imposing aura emanating from the girl's entire being was strongly felt. But, just a moment ago, the girl not even been able to stand back up, and now, the mystical energy swirling around her was suddenly even more intense than before. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, they really wouldn't be able to believe it. At that moment, in the battle arena itself, the girl's eyes was filled with incredulous shock herself, and tinged with sparkling delight and jubilation. She clenched her hands tightly into fists, and when she felt the mystical energy imbued into them, she suddenly lifted her eyes to glare at the stunned big man who was her opponent and said, "The winner hasn't been decided yet." The moment her voice dropped, her body exploded into movement that was 3 times faster than her usual as she whirled in an attack led by her fists. On her fists, the swirling mystical energy congealed, forming into air torrents that howled loudly. As the big man stared in disbelief, a punch struck him, sending him flying a distance of 10 meters. That power and the viciousness of that attack caused a loud gasp to sound out among the shocked crowd of spectators. The atmosphere over the arena tensed up and the high tension would be released them, and after a momentary lapse of quiet, the thousands of spectators all stood up together, their applause thunderous, their cheers reverberating deafeningly. Compared to the reactions of the entire crowd, Overseer Zhu was even more excited. He glanced one brief moment onto the battle arena where the outcome was about to be decided before he quickly shuffled back the way he had come. And throughout the arena, regardless whether it was the spectators on the first level or in the VIP rooms on the second level, everyone's faces suddenly revealed a thoughtful expression on their faces when they saw Overseer Zhu leaving quickly, and they all immediately tried to summon an attendant to get them to inquire just what was in that bottle earlier. In contrast to the bustle of excitement down below, Feng Jiu, who was in the private room just above, appeared extremely calm. That result had been within her expectation and she was not surprised in the least. And with that young girl's stubborn refusal to give up and strong urge to continue to fight, it would be strange indeed if she still lost after receiving the boost from the medicine. And before Feng Jiu's collected and composed demeanor, Old Deng and Overseer Dong were already red-faced with suppressed excitement, and their eyes sparkled and shone as they looked at Feng Jiu, looking like they had struck gold this time, just as ecstatic and excited. "Honored sire, may I ask how much more of that medicine do you have? And how would our honored sire like the trade with us to be like?" When Overseer Dong managed to recover his senses, even his form of address had changed, and his manners had improved tremendously. It must be said that a medicine with such amazing effects would definitely stir up a huge uproar even if it had shown up in the black market within the Cloudy Moon City. After all, in a tiny 9th-grade country like they were in, a medicine like this was something nobody would have seen before. Possessing a dose of medicine like this was as good as having another life-preserving talisman on the person, and even if they came to encounter a strong enemy that they would not be able to defeat, they would still be able to use it to run away and escape. How could that possibly not appeal to people? Is this medicine concocted by our honored sire himself? Is our honored sire a medical cultivator? Old Deng asked, his eyes sparkling with unabashed admiration as he stared at Feng Jiu, his gaze unwavering. Hearing that, Feng Jiu looked in askance at Old Deng, her voice chill and languid. "It would seem that I do not have to tell you who I am, do I?" Realizing that he had gone out of line, Old Deng hastily lowered his head in a bow. I beg that our honored sire does not take offense. This decrepit old man had gotten overly excited and have overstepped the boundaries. That's right. Can anyone remain calm in this situation? The man before his eyes could very well be a medical cultivator. Everyone knew that the Sun Glory country had never ever produced a medical cultivator before. Chapter 66 Esteemed Status. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sweeping her gaze over the two men, Feng Jiu then replied. I have 2 more bottles of the medicine with me, but I intend to sell them only through an auction, and any information about me must not be revealed in the very slightest. Hearing that there were 2 more bottles, Overseer Dong's eyes lit up and he smiled widely to say. Although we are operating a black market here, but without your honorable sire's consent, we will not leak out any details about our honorable sire, so our honorable sire can rest assured. Feng Jiu nodded and said. Additionally, I need you to help me find a few types of magical medicine. Her voice paused a moment before she continued. And when you manage it, I will gift you with a bottle of Qi gathering dew as payment for the effort. Of course, the price of the magical medicine will be separate. I will not shortchange you. The 2 men's eyes shone brightly as they quickly asked what kind of magical herb she wanted them to find. Finally, Feng Jiu asked for writing materials and she wrote down a list of magical herbs that she needed, handing the list over to them thereafter. Honorable sire, when all the magical are gathered, how do we contact you? Overseer Dong then asked. Feng Jiu glanced at him and told him. I will come back here again some days later, you don't have to worry about that. She brushed off her clothes with her hands and stood up, leaving 2 bottles of the medicine behind, as she began to stride outside. Honorable sire, please hold your step a moment. Overseer Dong called out once, hurrying to come stand beside the red-robed man to hand him a black token. This here is the black market's black token, a sign of esteem, and I would like our honorable sire to accept it. Hearing that, Feng Jiu reached out her hand to take it and she kept it within her sleeve before she continued on her way out. Seeing that, the 2 men scooped the bottles of medicine as they hurried to see the guest out. Once they got outside, they saw Overseer Zhu, who was returning with a wide smile on his face. Greetings to our honorable sire. Overseer Zhu bowed hurriedly, his demeanor highly excited, and he looked like he wanted to say something but was stopped by a raised hand. All of you do not need to see me off, I'll just tour around the place a little by myself. She stopped them from sending her off and immediately widened her stride to walk away. The 3 men saw the figure in red disappear around a corner before they retracted their gaze and indicated their intentions to each other before they all returned back to the private room. Quite a number of people have already tried to find out from me what was in the bottle, BVEC Overseer Zhu said with a zealous expression on his face. Although they did not say it clearly, but I am guessing they have guessed that it is medicine. After all, only a medicinal concoction can possibly give such astounding effects. Do not reveal any details about the honorable sire to anyone and just make the report to the higher-ups in secret. Overseer Dong said in a low voice. Do we need to send a few people on his tail? No. Overseer Dong shook his head. We have no idea of the man's depth, but I know for sure that he is a man we cannot offend. If we send men to follow him, we might just incur his displeasure and we stand to lose everything. At that moment, old Deng, who had not said a single word all this while, suddenly spoke. The magical herbs stayed on this list would not be that easy to find, I'm afraid. Why is that? Overseer Dong turned to look at him. As he wasn't too familiar with herbs, he didn't know much about the uses of the magical herbs in that list as well. All these are very rarely seen in our Sun Glory country and we will have to source them from other countries. Old Deng said, looking at the other 2 men, his eyes betraying his high spirits. I am certain that the gentleman is definitely a medical cultivator. Or, he could even possibly be an alchemist looking into pill refinement. What? The 2 overseers exclaimed in shock. Alchemist. That's such a reverential status, is it even possible? Judging from his voice, he should still be very young. How could he possibly be an alchemist? It was known that alchemists enjoyed an existence riding right at the pinnacle of medicinal cultivators. Not to mention a lowly tiny 9th-grade country, even within a medium 6th-grade country, it would be highly difficult to locate one. And the person the three men were talking about, was at that moment standing right before the black market's mercenaries' mission board, studying the various rewards and bounties offered. Her lips were curled up slightly, revealing a slight smile. Chapter 67. Two Powerful Fighters. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She had not expected that the bounty for her head had shot up all the way to be the third highest. TSK, what a surprise. She was still absorbed in her own thoughts when voices of people talking reached her ears. How did that girl in that portrait shoot up into the top 3? The bounty has actually reached 500,000. You just came back and you must not have been aware. No bounty hunter dares take up that mission now. Why is that? Because none of the mercenaries that have taken up that mission had come back alive. In just about 2 short weeks, quite a number of the guys had succumbed to that girl in the portrait. As the two men conversed, they looked at the flamboyant man dressed in all red and they became curious where one of the men asked. Is Sire looking to put out a bounty? After all, only the black market mercenaries are able to accept the missions put out on the board. Feng Jiu turned her eyes back to look at the two men and shook her head with a smile, seeing from out of the corner of her eyes the middle-aged man was already walking towards the exit and she walked off to follow behind him. After she left, the two black market mercenaries looked at each other and said in a low voice. That man looked like it was his first time here. There was an enchanting air all around him. Wonder what kind of a person he is. We don't have to bother who he is. Come, I'll buy you a drink. The other man slapped his companion on the back, and put his arm around his friend as they walked away. Walking back towards the inn, the middle-aged man suddenly stopped in his tracks, and he turned to look behind his back, his brows knitting up close together. He sped up and walked into an alley before he stopped once again and shouted out. Who is it? Show yourself. A figure in red stepped out, his steps filled with grace. He was dressed in a full suit of bright brilliant red, his black hair held together by a red silk ribbon. But what was slightly different was that the face was hidden behind a golden mask, decorated with mandala blooms, the flowers of hell. Staring at the person slowly walking out, the middle-aged man's eyes narrowed, an initial guess surfacing in his head, but he quickly rejected it. No, it shouldn't be that woman. The man before his eyes was taller than that woman and it can't be her. It's been some time since we last met. Feng Jiu's tone was lazy, tinged with mockery and a chilling air of murder. It's you. Upon hearing that familiar voice, the expression on his face changed slightly and his voice quaked faintly. The sudden instinctive fear he felt made him fall back 2 steps immediately, and his entire body to tense up in defense. Before the fight had begun, cold sweat was already running down his back. You can't blame him, a mystical warrior who was so fearful of a mere warrior, but as he had fought the girl before and was well aware of her skills. When he thought back to how he had nearly been killed under her hands, and having lost the use of an arm, unconscious terror had crept in, gripping his heart. That was the reason why he had gone to the black market to put up a bounty on her, and did not dare confront her directly instead. Seeing the man's reactions, Feng Jiu could not help it but laughed aloud and said. If you are so afraid of me, why would you still put a bounty on my head? She walked slowly forward, closing the gap between them 1 step at a time. I had almost forgotten that a man such as you still existed. Who would have thought that you would come running to appear right before me again? The moment she spoke those words, she heard some noises behind her. Her eyebrow lifted as she turned her eyes back to look. She did not know when another middle-aged man and an old man had appeared behind her. Both of them were commanded a strong presence, their gazes sharp and penetrating. A wave of oppressive aura flared out from the two newcomers and the air was filled with a murderous scent, filling up the entire alley. Ha ha ha. You want to kill me? That will depend on whether you possess the capabilities. The first middle-aged man had lost his previous panic and fear, and his eyes were now sparkling with excitement at seeing the two men on the other end of the alley. Chief Elder, Fourth Elder, this is the person. The one who killed Little Peng. Chapter 68 Blue Edge Unsheathed. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Elder. Her eyes glinted and she pushed her consciousness outwards in a probe. The other two men were full master warriors, having fully completed the levels. No wonder they had been able to appear behind her without her noticing. Compared to just facing the first middle-aged man where victory was certain, these two men, Senior Elder and Fourth Elder, were different as they gauged the devilishly alluring figure of Feng Jiu dressed fully in red. If they had not been told beforehand, they wouldn't have been able to tell that the figure looking like a man dressed in male clothing was actually a girl. Even the two of them who have seen and experienced much of the world had to admit to themselves that the person before them possessed an energy that was indistinguishable as neither male or female. And it felt so deep it was unfathomable. With their level of cultivation, they were not unable to see through her levels. What else could you call that but unfathomable? From the moment they had appeared, they had not seen her exhibit a single trace of shock or fear. The lips that were exposed outside the mask had a faintly sinister smile playing across them, that caused the two of them to have their hearts filled with caution and wariness. Just who are you really? Why do you choose to go against our Su family? The Senior Elder asked in a deep voice, his penetrating gaze staring right at the red figure. Feng Jiu glanced at the Senior Elder a moment and her tone was quizzical. Go against you? Come on. It was you guys who have been persecuting me all this time. When have I initiated a fight with any of you? She paused a moment and she turned her gaze to the front towards the first middle-aged man with a mirthless smile and said. If not for this second master from your family running to the black market to put a price on my head, how would I even be able to find him? Even so, you killed our Su family's young master and crippled one of our second master's arm. Those are facts that you cannot deny. Oh. From what you are saying, when you guys are trying to kill me, I should just extend my neck and offer it to all of you on a platter. She asked with an eyebrow raised, the faint smile still on her face, but the glint in her eyes was chill and frosty. The Senior Elder's face darkened and he said with a cold laugh. Then you can only blame your fate to have offended people you should not go against in the first place. Our distinguished Su family with almost a century's standing is not something you can stand up to. If you know what's good for you, surrender yourself to us or. Feng Jiu curled up the ends of her lips and laughed wildly, and then she asked in a highly inquisitive tone. Or what? Kill me, or we'll bring just your head back in answer for our mission. The Senior Elder spat out, his fingers immediately curling up into claws, showing his high proficiency in the art of grappling and seizing. Then let me respond in kind and see how you fare. She laughed out coldly and her body moved immediately to confront her opponent in battle. The Senior Elder imbued his hands with thick robust mystical power and grabbed onto her wrist, thinking to twist it backwards, but Feng Jiu was slippery as a snake as she broke free of his grip and reversed her wrist to grasp onto his wrist instead, immediately pulling him forward. His lower body lost balance and he felt a surge of power from her hand still holding onto him, suddenly finding himself being lifted off the ground and thrown back. The Senior Elder then dispersed his power and fought to find his balance as he flipped himself to land on the ground. His face was dark as he said. I see that you do know a few moves. A pity, that death will be the only outcome here today. It's really a pity. She nodded in agreement, looking at him with regret and sympathy, as if she had already ascertained that the one who would die would be the Senior Elder. Her rueful and sympathetic gaze greatly infuriated the Senior Elder and he pulled out his long sword to point it directly at her, roaring out loudly. Frivolous brat! You shall pay heavily for your condescending manners. Your head is mine to take today. The sword's point pointed forward, as thick robust mystical energy flowed from the body like the tide as it surged out, gathering over the sword's sharp edge. In an instant, a malicious aura filled with sinister oppression shot out from the sword. The senior elder charged in an instant, bringing with him his terrifying murderous rage as he moved faster than the speed of sound as he charged at the red figure. Clang! A long sword glowing blue at the edges blocked his attack before him. The sword clashed against each other, the razor-sharp aura from the swords neither giving in an inch. At that same moment, several gasps of shock sounded as well. Blue. Blue-edge sword. Chapter 69 Blue Edge Tastes Blood. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Crack. Clank. A loud crack of breaking sounded, the senior elder's eyes widened in shock as he stared at the sword glowing blue in her hand before turning to look at the long crack in the sword he held in his hand, and his heart sank. The next moment, the long sword in his hand broke into two under his opponent's sword's chi and fell with a loud clatter onto the ground. At the same time, he could not dodge the malicious chi emanating from the sword in time, and he found his entire person suddenly thrown back from his spot. Arg! He lost his balance and was falling a few steps backwards. Fortunately, the fourth elder behind managed to hold him, preventing him from having to fall embarrassingly to the ground. How is that possible? It can't possibly be the blue-edged sword. The senior elder stared in disbelief at the legendary sword that was giving out a blue glow held in his opponent's hand. The glow being emanating from it was bright and brilliant. Throughout the lands, only the legendary blue-edged sword could glow such a brilliant blue on its own. Not just him, the fourth elder and the Su family's second master were showing great astoundment on their faces at that moment. However, besides the shock and astoundment, their eyes were also tinged with greed towards the sword of legend before their eyes. The legendary blue-edged sword, it was the legendary sword among legends. The blue-edged sword that had disappeared for so many years had suddenly resurfaced today, and it was right before their eyes. How could they not be excited? How could they resist the urge that grew in their hearts to want to possess it as their own? The blue edge was pointed in a slant towards the ground, its blue glow pulsating, red clothes billowing out as a bloodthirsty aura flared out from Feng Jiu's being. She stared at the astounded faces and the covetous eyes of the three men, and her lips arched as the corners lifted, to reveal a sinister and chilling smile as she said. Anyone who lays eyes on this sword, has to die. The moment the voice dropped, the red figure immediately swept out like a demon. However, she did not move towards the senior elder and the fourth elder, but had instead spun back, and with a sweep of the blue edge in hand, a malicious wave of the sword's chi tore through the air. Arg! The Su family's second master was caught completely unawares was a slash across his throat. It was too abrupt for him to defend against, and also, it had been too fast. Till the moment of death, his eyes were still staring widely in disbelief. Till death, his heart had still been aggrieved. Second master. The senior elder and the fourth elder shouted out in surprise as they saw the figure falling over stiffly. It had just been a blink, and their second master's life had been taken right before their eyes. As the sword had moved so fast, so much so that the blood had not flowed out from the throat, till the body fell over and moved the wound on the neck that had taken his life. It was only then that the blood gushed out like a scarlet pillar as it shot upwards, staining the entire area garishly red. That was the brother the head of the house favored the most, and he was now dead as well. They really could not imagine how big a rage the head would be in when they went back. Seeing the expressions the two men were showing on their faces, Feng Jiu laughed and said, "Do you really think that you will be able to leave here alive?" From the moment she had drawn the blue-edged sword, she had not intended to let any of the three men walk out of this place alive. This little alley will be their final resting place. Her eyes narrowed and a cold glint flashed within. Her murderous aura flared and the figure in red immediately rushed towards the two men. She flicked the blue-edged sword in her hand and the cold and sharp chi of the sword was thrown out, morphing into blades as they flew forward. Kill her. the two men shouted out in rage. The senior elder held his broken sword before him as he charged forward, while the fourth elder drew his sword as well to attack simultaneously. With the two of them combining their attacks, the oppressive aura of full master warriors instantly pervaded the entire small alley, the air suddenly turning thick and stifling. Clank! Shink! Shink! As the swords clashed, the sharp outflow of chi and the sounds of sword fighting was incessant. And fear slowly creeped into their hearts as they were slowly engulfed by Feng Jiu's bloodthirsty murderous aura, coupled with her lethal attacks that aimed to kill, delivered with uncanny precision, causing the two men to be feeling overwhelmed and a little flurried. No.